Good afternoon and welcome to teissTalk. I'm your host, Jenny Radcliffe, and I've got a great show for you today. Later, I'll be discussing the topic of remote security culture with guests Carl Hubert and Mark Avery, talking about how do we define security here if there is no here. But first, I'd like to welcome John Scott to the show. John, hi, John. John's head of security education at the Bank of England, and someone who knows a thing or two about the challenges of bringing security awareness to a large team. So welcome to Thais.
Thank you.
So first of all, John, just give us a little bit more of an idea of exactly what it is that your job entails.
Sure. So we've got, depending on how you count it, between 4,500 and 5,500 people working at the bank, both full-time staff and contractors. And obviously, being the organisation that we are, we've been thinking about security for a very long while. My role.
Interested to know more about that. Yes.
Well, we're 325 years we've been looking after the nation's gold. We haven't lost it yet.
I was hoping after COVID you might give me a tour, let me have a proper look around, John.
The bits that I'm allowed into, I mean, you could probably get, given what you do, Jenny, you could probably get further into some bits of the bank than I can. Yeah, definitely. So we've been looking at a sort of unified view of security for a long time, and one of the key things out of that, and certainly from an information security point, going back to the sort of 10 steps to cybersecurity, we've been looking at what the human impact on security is. What are the behaviours that we need to encourage? What are the behaviours we need to discourage? But what I think we're trying to do as much as we can is not put that into silos. So we do look at information security, cybersecurity, physical security, personnel security, but we also try and not draw those lines unless we have to. So all of the time we're saying, ultimately, what is the thing that someone who's trying to be a good member of staff, and everybody is largely trying to do that, but what are the things that they can do to help keep the bank safe?
And I mean, I guess, so in 325 years, there's obviously been major events that the bank's come through. I'm thinking, wars and everything else. And it's probably not even your first, pandemic. But how did the team cope? How did your team cope with what happened in 2020 with the coronavirus and everything that went with it? Was it a smooth transition with the plans that you had that you can talk about that help maybe?
Sure. So I think we were in sort of a mixture of good luck and judgment, but we were in a good place going into the pandemic for, I would say, three main factors. Number one, when the PRA joined us in 2013, there was a decision made that the vast majority of people would go laptop first. So we have quite a lot of hot desking within the organisation, and we went from everybody being on desktops to almost everybody being on laptops. That gave us mobility, and one of the things we were looking at doing internally was increasing our technology to allow us to be mobile within the building. The second thing goes back to there's a large snowstorm, I think it was 2012, and we had VPN connections for 600 people, and a system whereby if you're on list A, if you were one of the priorities and all the 600 slots were taken up, when you tried to log on, someone on list B got kicked off. Okay. So we managed it that way, and we came off of a very long snow day when Kent, I think, was snowed in for a week, and a lot of our staff are in there, and nobody could really get any work done, because even if you got on, there was always a chance that somebody with a higher priority was going to boot you off the VPN.
Okay.
So the organisation at that point said, we will always have enough VPN slots for everyone to work from home.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the combination of those two things, and then the final factor that we were just working, even though largely 95% of our staff are in two buildings within 200 feet of each other, we were trying to support remote working, support flexible working. So we brought in a new AV solution internally, and that had just bedded in when we suddenly got everybody pick up your laptops and go home.
Wow, so, really timing.
Yeah, and so I'd say some of that was good judgment, some of that's a slightly conservative approach to say, effectively, we'll over-engineer a solution so that everybody can work from home, because we know, what percentage is enough.
Because things happen, events, right? Yeah.
Well, it's like somebody pointed out about the lifeboats on the Titanic, right? And somebody said, if you think about it, they either believed the ship was unsinkable, in which case you don't need any lifeboats, or it isn't, in which case you need lifeboats. And if you need lifeboats, you need one for everyone, right? So to put it half and half, where there's enough lifeboats for 10% of the boat of the boat to get off safely, is kind of like, why are you bothering? Either have none or have them all. And I think we kind of took that approach with the VPN solution of, well, unless we do have a good priority list where we can say, do you know what, Jenny, you're not on our priority list. You don't need to do any work on a snow week.
Yeah.
But if we do need you to, then we have to have sufficient capacity.
Absolutely, and I'm thinking we'll pick this up with the panel a little bit later on, because I think there were challenges. We've got some sort of best practice stories from the pandemic, from that transition, and sort of, I think, probably some disaster stories as well. But I wanted to kind of bring you to sort of a little bit of a news item, really, and get your view on it, John, because I know that you said in the past that every cybersecurity issue has got a human at the heart of it, but the humans are really struggling at the moment. And there was a survey by VPN Overview that came out in Info Security magazine that actually said that 68% of UK workers don't consider cybersecurity impact of working from home. And I just wondered whether that was something that, did that figure surprise you? I mean, what do you think the problem might be there?
Ultimately, the first time I saw that, I was just like, no, that can't be true.
So high.
Show me the data. I want to know, I want to know more, etc., etc. And I would love to, if anyone from VPN Online is there, I'd love to reach out more and find out more of the data. But when I sat back and I thought about it, some of my initial reaction came from a massive sense of privilege, which is working for an organization that's large enough that we can have a security team that isn't one person. And we were, as I said, through a combination of luck and judgment, we were in a good position to say, okay, actually, we can send 90% of you home and not have to do anything else other than boost our capacity.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you're in security, that sounds so alarming. And you think of all the work that we do in awareness and education. It seems alarming, but, there was more things in that survey that really got to me and made me think, because of those people, I found it more alarming. The 45% said they could lose their job if their working device security was compromised. So these are people who did know the consequences of poor security in that sort of working from home environment, but still said that they really didn't know, they didn't really consider the impact. They found figures like, people working, the one that I found was not funny, but like sort of made me raise my eyebrows as a social engineer. 32% of people said they were working in plain sight of a window, that their laptop was in a window. I mean, I think I do that, even given what I do. So I think overall it was quite an alarming set of statistics in some ways, very revealing.
I think so. And I think what it really shows to me, and this is the core of a lot of what we do, right? What it really shows to me is it's a bit of a truism, but human beings are really bad at assessing risk, right? And I think especially in a circumstance like this, where even a year, coming on for a year in now, we go in and out of lockdown. We might be in a different tier depending where we are in the country. We might get to see friends at Christmas. We might not. There's so much uncertainty out there. And, we only have so much cognitive load, right? We only have so much ability to deal with change. And I think one of the things that, again, maybe a position of privilege, but one of the things that we were aware of is back in March, we made some risk-based decisions about, okay, we can allow access to this system that we would normally say you have to come into the building, but we have to now allow access. What we had to do is say, okay, here's a short-term solution, but we can't let that become standard practice now. Okay. We have to, effectively, we're going to carry some more risk now. We're going to do things in a way that we wouldn't have done a year ago because they are more risky, but we have to, because people have to work from home. But now what other controls can we put in to compensate that? And I wonder, again, if you're a small organization, if there's 30 of you and maybe you've got one IT guy who also does security, who also does this, that, and the other, how much ability, how much leverage, how much resource has that person got to say, well, we've got everybody working remotely. I've got access to the central server, the document server, or whatever it is, so that everybody can now log into that from how much capacity has that person got to then go, right, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to harden it.
But I think this is the thing, I mean, that you've said all along, and it's something that I say, and I know we agree on this, is that security is not one person's job. and how I think how prepared an organisation probably was before in really taking that to heart and really trying to get everyone aware, probably governed to a certain extent some of the responses in that survey, right? I mean,
absolutely. And I think, the point that you made about I think the survey says when they were questioned, they said, oh, I don't think about this at home. But when they were questioned, they said, oh, yeah, that would really impact my job. I might lose my job over it. And it's almost like they have that in the back of their head, but there's everything else they've got to deal with that comes to the forefront. And while, as you say, you and I agree 100% on this, security is everyone's job. But if my job is sales, or if my job is graphic design, or whatever it is, I don't think it's unreasonable to say the culture of the organization should support me in remembering that security is also part of my job, and telling me, in some cases, in really clear statements, I don't like yes and no lists, but yes, do this, no, don't do that. And if you do those things, then you're getting there. Yeah. And that's the sort of central guidance that an organization can put out at a quite basic level, even just to say, we're not trying to get you all to learn how to be super hackers or IT gurus or anything like that, but here's some common behaviors that will make us more secure. Yeah, and that's the bit that I think is everyone's job.
And I think you're so right. And I also think that at this point that'd be a great point to bring in the rest of the panel in on, because I know that our two panel guests are going to want to comment on those excellent points you made there, John. So thank you for that. Cool. And now I wonder if we could bring in our other two guests. I have here, I have Kyle Hubert, who is the Head of Security Training and Awareness at the Options Clearing Corporation. Welcome, Kyle.
Good morning from Texas.
Good morning. And also to bring in Mark Avery, who is Director of the Cyberchain Alliance and, amongst other things, co-founder of the Cyber House Party event, a community that's brought a lot of people together over the pandemic and has been amazing in that way, as well as his expertise in the business. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Jenny. Good to be here.
So, I mean, I just wonder, first of all, if either of you'd like to comment on those last sort of points that John was making about security being everybody's job and some really good starters for 10 that people can look at. I mean, do you agree with those points, Kyle?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say that I'd like to build a little bit on John's point, right? Mm-hmm. One of the main ways that we create a culture of security is essentially to have people emulate successful behavior. It's one thing to tell people you must do this or you must not do that. They may or may not take that to heart, and they may or may not obey. What they will do, however, is through social proof, they will emulate the behavior of the most influential people around them. That is, they see what the director or the whoever it is that they believe is the model for right behavior. They're going to do what they do because they want to be part of the group. They want to be validated and accepted. And that works fine when you are around those key influencers and you can watch them. When we're all working remotely, that goes away. Mm-hmm. And so what we're experiencing culturally is drift. The only time we interact really is like this, right? Either over a phone call or over a video teleconference, where we're really not seeing those security hygiene behaviors, which means it's not reinforcing and communicating and explaining the security behaviors that we need to follow in order to keep the organization and ourselves safe.
Mm. And I mean, I think one part of that as well that it always makes me think is when I'm talking to people about social engineering and about that human check, when you look up and you say, did anyone else get this strange email? Did anyone else, I've just had an odd phone call, and your buddy across the office says, are you okay? You look confused. All of that was gone. And you're right. And so it's kind of like we're all sort of more self-reliant. I mean, Mark, what do you think? I'm sorry, I do hope I got your title right. I got a note here to say Chief Information Security Officer and founder of the Cyberchain Alliance. So apologies if I didn't. So what do you think? I mean, would you add to those comments?
I certainly add to that, and I maybe just building upon it, talk about culture and well-being. I think that it's when we are in a physical location. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, I'm getting some feedback on my microphone. There we go. Another phrase of 2020 and 2021. Can you hear me okay?
You carry on, we can hear you.
Culture is really important when you're in a physical environment. You can see people, you can see their behavior, you can understand when they're off camera, when they're under pressure. And, I'm sure like many others, I've had people within my teams really struggle with mental health over the last 5 to 10 years. And you can see that. And now that we're all scheduled to meet each other at a certain point in the day, we're all there ready. We've got our coffee and drinks, and we say that we're okay, but are we really okay? And in the summer, when we had the idea to create something called the Cyber House Party, it was born from that sense of community. Personally, I needed to do something else. Friends around me from within the industry needed to do something else. And we just came up with an idea. We love playing music to everybody. We wanted to talk about some challenging topics as well. And we wanted to raise some money for charities. And we did that. What we described as bringing the community together. We talked about mental health. We talked about inclusion. We talked about diversity. We talked about how to bring more people into the cyber industry. And it was a different level of conversation. And it was deeper than, are you okay? And what we saw, to our surprise, is that so many people supported us. So many people wanted to get involved and did. And it was for their own personal satisfaction as much as anything. And so from that, what I've taken and what we talk to our clients about is that culture. And if you really want to build upon that, you have to create that community within your organization. You can't no longer just rely upon output-based training and awareness. You really have to understand how they are operating and how they're really feeling. And, as we stand here now, after raising £10,000 over 3 events, it's going strong, and we'll continue to do that. But it's just that sense of community that I think that hits home for me.
I mean, that sort of creates a culture in and of itself, I think, Mark. And there was something sort of opportunistic, really, and innovative about it. I mean, are these some of the positive side benefits that comes from this step change that we've all experienced, do you think? That maybe wouldn't have happened so quickly without this sudden migration. I mean, it's more of a migration in the UK than it would be in the States, Kyle, I guess.
Sorry, James, that question to me or Carl?
I was just wondering well, it was to everyone really, but I'm just saying, I wondered with Kyle, we were speaking on some of the prep of the show and saying that in the States, it was like there was more remote working just as a function of geography. I think we've just lost Kyle just for a minute. But what I was saying to yourself, Mark, was that innovation, it was an opportunistic thing, really, in a good way. It was like, let's take that opportunity and make sure that culture carries on, and it really did.
Yeah,
we did. We saw side benefits in the job as well of that sudden.
Definitely, because what we found is that the people who were willing to talk about their mental health, for example, they probably hadn't discussed those sorts of things to their own teammates in some circumstances. And so we almost created this sense of being, I think Manoj from Company 85 described it so well. We almost created a safe space to talk.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the intention when we set out there. So it was opportunistic. But looking back and learning from that, we should act positively to try and create that safe space.
I look at this and I think about the question or the initial sort of title of the show, which is what we say is like, culture's what happens here. And one of the things that we're talking about is, can we still define it if there is no here? So maybe go to John and then to Kyle. Can we define, is this what the culture is now? Is this something that unexpectedly is still part of what we do? And how do we, perhaps as a secondary question, how do we keep up with this evolution?
Sure. So I think culture happens no matter what. You will always have a culture. It's just whether you try and shape it and not control, that's the wrong word, but certainly whether you try and influence it. I think for me, and this is where I think Mark's work is really fascinating, and I really like that he's emphasizing the word community. I think what we've had to do over the last year is create artificial community where it would have occurred naturally. And that takes effort, that takes work. So, for example, just within my team, to look at the impact on my team, we have a morning stand-up every morning now. We have 15 minutes at the beginning of the day, which is just, how are you doing? What's the stresses? What's in the way? Because if we If we don't have that, then A, I don't see anybody outside my family, but B, I don't get those regular touch points just to say, actually, you're looking a little bit off. So yeah, I think really the way that we have to do this is take every opportunity to connect.
Yeah.
You know, to make sure that we're reaching out, because if nothing else, that's also good security behavior, right? If we think somebody's going to go off the rails, there are probably some early signs. If we can deal with them at that point when they're feeling stressed, but before anything bad happens, then it's better for everyone. So it's good well-being, it's good ethics, and it's good security.
I absolutely 100%. Can I get back to Kyle now? Are you okay now, Kyle? I think we just lost you just briefly.
I certainly hope so. Can you hear me all right?
We can. In terms of this spontaneous cultural adaptation, that's one thing. How do we apply that to training and education programs? I mean, what did you think was the best practice in taking that education and awareness into this kind of work from home en masse environment?
So what I just experienced here is a very good example of what users everywhere are experiencing. We're in the middle of a meeting and all of a sudden all of my audio drops out and I'm on like my fourth troubleshooting step to get back on. And that's what we're all doing. So as such, one of the things that I've noticed, I got together with 200 other security awareness people back in December, and we talked through this. The sheer amount of difficulty that everyone's experiencing, just trying to do basic tasks, on its own is enough to leave everyone continuously and incessantly frustrated. It means you go into every event, to every meeting, upset, irritated, and almost prone to confrontation. So what we found, talking about it amongst ourselves, our messaging had to be more direct, far more targeted, and we had to speak in terms of how do we actually reduce stress, reduce anxiety, and create a people are actually willing to listen to our security message. Because we can talk all day about the importance of not clicking on links and fish. No one's going to pay attention if they're still angry about the fact that they couldn't hear the mandatory meeting that they're supposed to be in.
Absolutely.
So address the stress first, then create the conditions necessary to actually deliver a much more targeted, focused message.
And I think, just wanted to pick up on what John said about that cognitive load. Certainly at the beginning of 2020, sort of in the spring, when the world did really lock down, that first kind of hard lockdown in the UK and in other places, people were falling for a lot more online crimes and scams and everything else. But it's exactly, I just really agree with what John said, because it wasn't the most forefront thing in their mind. People were frightened, the information was disparate and incomplete, and everyone was sort of thinking on their feet. And I think we all thought that this would be a more temporary situation than it's turned out to be. So I wondered whether any of you had a comment on, are we doing it better this time around? In terms of things like this, in terms of talks and conferences and programs, do you feel like we're going to carry on getting better, or do you think that everyone just wants it to go away and go back to normal and forget all the lessons learned? Really, I sometimes wonder whether we're one or the other. I mean, to everyone, really, just for comment.
So, all right. So my take on this, right? It's kind of like if you're going to take a long distance running. When you first start, it's very painful. You're not warmed up, you're not stretched out, and you're not moving as quick as you could. The further you get into the race, the more you warm up, you find your natural stride, and you're able to sustain for a while. That is doing that. However, it's also chewing up your long-term endurance. And that's where I feel we're about to enter our second year of being locked down, and people have a finite level of endurance, both emotional and physical. And there's a huge amount of hope that things are going to get better, that we're going to return to normal. That was our hobgoblin in the very beginning of the lockdown. Oh, we can put everything off until later. It's fine. We'll be back at the office and back to normal in just a couple of weeks. Well, now here we are a year later, and a lot of those small tasks fell off the radar, and a lot of behaviors have been sidelined in the hopes that we'd be over it quickly. Now, what I see going forward is that we're going to be entering a completely new normal. Going back to work is going to be a lot more difficult. There's also going to be a huge cultural reintegration problem, because we've had people that have been out of the office for up to a year in some cases. We've also had people that joined the company after the pandemic started that have never been in our environment.
Right.
And their impressions of what our culture is are completely unmoored from reality. So bringing people back in and trying to reestablish some semblance of normality is actually going to be quite a challenge, as people's expectations and beliefs clash with what we try to do when we get back together.
Yeah, I mean, I want to come back to that in a little while, but can I just go to John just on that question of onboarding people at a distance? I mean, that must have been challenging for yourself.
So I think it was because we were set up that everybody came into the building at one point. So everybody joined on a Tuesday or joined on a Monday, and I got to see them on the Tuesday. I think the way we looked at it was we had that very quick initial response, because ultimately our first onboarding. So number one, I think like a lot of organizations, we massively reduced the number of people that we were bringing in. So when everything, especially as Kyle said, once we started getting into that, hold on, this isn't a 2-week thing, this is going to be for a while. So we started prioritizing, well, how many people can we bring in? Are we bringing in the critical people? Are there roles where we can hold them open for a while or what have you? Second is we really prioritize the message. So I went from I think our initial onboarding, I went from something like we get an hour to talk to people every week. I think I had 3 slides. So I really had to distill down what is the absolute core things that we need you to do. I'm not going to tell you about wearing your pass in the building, because you're not going into the building, all of those sort of things. And then making sure that we said, okay, well, what's our finite lifetime on this? We're only going to use this 3-slide deck for as short a time as possible. Now, what are we going to do? Yeah. And that involved finding online interaction tools, so we could actually stop it just being that people sit there and fall asleep. So we've actually got questions and quizzes going through. All of the stuff that we could do in the real world by getting people to stick their hand up, we had to find some way of replicating. So, and then following up. Because, with the best will in the world, maybe people have connection issues or whatever it is. So now we send a follow-up email that says, hey, just in case you missed half of it, here are the key points that we cover. I mean, it's not just the deck. We're actually sending you just a single page document that says, this is the summary of everything that we talked about. Here's our contact points. Here's useful links. Yeah. So it's a much more extended process now. And we're still getting good feedback. We tell good stories. We show people behind the curtain a little bit. We tell them things that we wouldn't tell them if they didn't work for us. And then we follow up to make sure that they realise that we're the approachable face.
I mean, I wonder what Mark thought. I mean, that's obviously one company's experience. Do you think that's replicated across the industry, Mark? I know you've got a sort of a big umbrella view of lots of
it's interesting actually. So in some of our clients who are used to working remotely, this situation is kind of normal for them. That was their culture, and I suspect that anybody who started a company within 2020, they're going to have started in this experience, and so they might build themselves to continue that. But I think one of the biggest challenges is that I spent years in companies trying to work out what culture actually meant. Yeah. And people spend millions paying various consultancy firms to define culture and improve it, but it's really difficult. You can just see it, you can hear it, you can feel it, you can smell it in some circumstances, and that's what makes a culture. For good or bad. Yeah. And so we don't have that anymore. We don't learn it. If you're a new employee into an organization, you cannot learn those boundaries. You cannot feel that. Yeah. And so it's upon the organizations now to actually possibly just rip up that book, start again and say, this is our culture from now on. We expect this of you. And I think from the top to the bottom, the whole approach for businesses now, from their strategy, their goals, their ambitions, all the way through what we determine as policies and procedures and the parameters in which we can work, possibly have to be at least reviewed, if not rewritten quite a lot, to define what this thing is, because it's here to stay in some form, I would suggest.
And not just once. I think it's just dynamic. It's just going to have to be constantly done. Just sort of to kind of wind this up a little bit, I just want to come to Kyle again and just go back and hear your comments, John and Mark, on it as well, because I know you spoke, Kyle, about when we do go back, how are people going to adapt? And you said when we were doing the research, are we going to expect people to go back in, trousers are optional? I mean, in all seriousness, is it going to be a less formal atmosphere, do you think? Or do you think that people will double down when they're in the office, they're going to be more formal than ever before because it'll be so novel? I mean, in a way, what's next? And I know that if 2020 taught us anything, is not to try and make predictions, but I just wondered, how do you think it's going to look when we all go back?
I think it's going to be a heck of a challenge. And I think a lot of that comes down to senior leadership at every organization deciding, all right, now that we've been through kind of a crucible moment, let's decide who we actually want to be. Who do we believe we are? And there may, some organizations may get even more formal for a time to help reestablish certain boundaries. Others may relax a little and unclench compared to where they were pre-pandemic. For example, I mean, this is maybe the only time I wear a dress shirt anymore is to get on a video, webinar like this, which has saved a lot of money on cleaning over the year. Going back to doing every day might actually be a good thing, because putting on the costume that you associate with the role helps you more easily fall into that role and follow the appropriate behaviors to that environment that you wouldn't necessarily do if you were in, an Iron Maiden t-shirt. So yeah, I think
there's nothing wrong with that Iron Maiden t-shirt, but I know what you mean. And what I'm thinking, Kyle, and talk to the other two, you might have seen me in an Iron Maiden t-shirt today. It was a last minute decision not to wear one, but Kyle said then, companies going to have to really redefine who they are. I kind of wonder if they're going to get the choice. Do we get to say that anymore? Or is who we are whoever goes back into work? I mean, given that the people are going to bring that in.
This is something I've argued a lot, all right?
Okay.
Look at some dysfunctional cultures, right? So there is the intent to drive culture from a leadership perspective, always. But most culture actually has a small work group level, and it's the conflict between who we say we want to be and who we actually are, right? When that clash happens, that's when you actually have to negotiate your real values, what you're actually going to enforce or encourage or just accept. And I think coming back together is going to be one of those great formative moments for companies where the drift they've had over the last year, or however long it's going to wind up being, is going to force them to reevaluate, what do we actually want to invest the most effort and attention in, and what can we afford to let go?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's, just to add to that, Carl, I think there's a consideration for the bigger picture as well. I mean, I was just actually reflecting on a story I continued to tell people up until February 2020, which was the one whereby a new startup, I think in the Reading area of the UK, was really struggling to employ somebody, and many people actually, and it was just the wrong time. This was a few years ago now. And very, very suddenly, after changing the job description to say part-time accepted, returning parents back to work who need to go and do the school run, are welcome. And that suddenly improved his chances of finding really good candidates. And look where we are now, everything is remote. But the point I wanted to make is that we should also consider the bigger picture here, the economy, right? If an organization decides, we're not going to use our London HQ anymore, we're going to continue to work remotely or move somewhere else, then there's an impact on that local economy as well. So we definitely need to think about that. I've not bought a new shirt for 12 months, probably. I've not needed to. And so there is a hit. I miss going to the Costa around the corner from the office in Victoria Street, London. And it's that kind of thing that we need to think about as well. So it's definitely, we need to think about it from a balanced point of view.
Absolutely. In some ways, I think we've all become more local, like hyper local, just as in the house. And then in other ways, we've also started to think a bit more further about the economy. Any last points to add on that, John?
So I think there's an etiquette issue here. And it's one that we're discussing very, very clearly within the bank. I don't think we're all going to go back at the same time. So what we're currently discussing is what's the etiquette of a hybrid meeting.
Yeah.
Is it if one person is remote, then everybody just stays at their desks and logs onto their laptops, for example? Yeah. Because we've all had that meeting where we're the only person dialing in, and there's a because you can't really hear, and you're not picking up the body language and everything. Now that we're all we've had a year to get used to being online. We've had a year to get used to the idiosyncrasies of video conferencing. If we go back to I'm the only person dialing in and therefore I might as well not bother, then we haven't learned anything. And, you were talking about the positives earlier.
Yeah.
This is the first collared shirt I've worn in 5 months.
Doesn't it feel restricting? Hey?
I quite like it. There is a little bit of me wants to get my 3-piece suits out and put them on.
Well, I'll say we've had a comment on our chat from Lynn Coventry, and what she's actually said here is that research has actually shown that it's good for your mental health, or it's detrimental sometimes just to stay in your pajamas all day. That idea of getting up and getting ready for a working day, even if that working day is at your kitchen table, it's good to kind of get ready for that. And I think that's what we're all sort of saying in a way. It's like, we've got to mentally prepare that we are still at work, we are still doing an important job. But it seems to me that the conclusion, if there is one, is that this is an ongoing dynamic process and we're all trying to adapt to it for our own sake as well as the businesses. I think that seems to be what's coming to me is that this is an ongoing issue. Yeah. We're not out of this thing yet, gentlemen.
No. To add to that, Jenny, I kind of see it as also as an opportunity as well. I don't think we're surfing a wave onto that beach that we're used to. I think we're off in a different kind of uncharted waters somewhere at the moment, and it's up to us to try and help define that. And I love what John's saying about defining etiquette, because that's one of many things that organisations need to think about.
Well, I think that seems like as good a place as any to end what's been a fantastic discussion. So I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank all my guests. I'd like to thank John Scott, Mark Avery, and Carl Hubert for your input and advice, really, I think, today. I'd also like to thank all of our listeners, our audience, for spending some time with us today. And just to invite you to next week. Next Tuesday, we've got a great show for you. We're discussing cyber resilience in a post-pandemic world next week with some great guests, including the lovely Sarah Armstrong-Smith. But for now, thanks again to my guests.
Thank you.
Thanks again to everybody listening. Stay safe, take care, and we'll see you next time on teissTalk.
Bye.